A nurse sang lullabies to a comatose boy every night, gentle songs in a language she barely remembered from her grandmother. What she didn't know, his father, the vampire king, stood in the shadows every night, forbidden by ancient law from revealing himself until the child woke. Now the boy's eyes have opened, and the king must choose between his throne and the woman who sang his son back to life. Elena Marsh pushed through the double doors of St. Catherine's Medical Center at 5:47 in the morning, her scrubs smelling of antiseptic and the bitter coffee from the nurse's station, her shoulders tight from 12 hours of monitoring vitals and changing IV bags and coaxing elderly patients through the confused hours before dawn. The sky was that particular shade of gray that meant the sun was thinking about rising but hadn't committed yet, and the parking lot stretched empty except for a scattering of cars belonging to the morning shift, and one black sedan parked in the same spot it had occupied for weeks now, sleek and patient as a held breath. Elena noticed it the way she noticed everything after years of night shifts, the small anomalies that might mean something, or might mean nothing. But she was too tired to care and her feet hurt, and all she wanted was her bed and 8 hours of silence. She unlocked her Honda and tossed her bag onto the passenger seat, then stopped. Something pulled at her, the same instinct that made her double-check medication doses and listen to the quality of a patient's breathing in the dark. And now's the time to stop and subscribe to our channel. Every subscriber brings us closer to 1,000, which helps us keep these stories alive and coming your way. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these tales travel across the world. Now let's continue. She turned back toward the building, toward the fourth floor where the ICU glowed like a capsule of white light suspended in the gray morning. And she thought about Gabriel. The boy had been brought in 6 months ago on a Tuesday night, 7 years old and small for his age. His chart listing vehicular trauma and subdural hematoma and a prognosis that got quieter every week. No family had come forward. No one visited. The bills were paid by wire transfer from an account with no name attached, and the social worker had stopped asking questions after the third month because the money kept coming and the bed was needed, and sometimes children fell through cracks that no one wanted to look at too closely. Elena had started singing to him 3 months ago after a summer storm rolled through and his heart rate spiked to dangerous levels, the monitors shrieking until she came in and found him still unconscious, but somehow distressed, his small hands clenched on the sheets. She had sung without thinking, one of the lullabies her grandmother used to hum while cooking, old Occitan words she barely remembered and didn't understand. Just sounds and melody and the memory of being small and safe. The monitors had calmed. Gabriel's hands had uncurled. After that, she sang to him every night during her rounds, soft enough that no one else could hear, and she told herself it was for the vitals, for the data, because nurses dealt in evidence and outcomes, not miracles. Tonight his fingers had moved. Not a twitch or a spasm, but a deliberate flutter, like he was reaching for something in a dream. Elena had frozen mid-verse, her hand hovering over his wrist, and watched as his eyelids shifted beneath their closed lids. Then nothing. Stillness again. But it had been something. She knew it the way she knew the difference between sleep and unconsciousness, between a body resting and a body fighting. She should have charted it. She should have called the neurologist. Instead, she had finished her shift and walked to her car, and now she was walking back because the pull was too strong and she needed to see him one more time before she left. The ICU was quieter at shift change, the night nurses gathering their things and the day nurses reviewing charts, and no one stopped her as she walked down the hall to Gabriel's room at the far end. Isolated because his case was complicated and the insurance situation was delicate, and sometimes it was easier to keep certain patients out of sight. She pushed open the door. The room was dim, just the glow from the monitors and the pale pre-dawn light filtering through the window. Gabriel lay still, his chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm the ventilator had been removed from 2 months ago, a victory so small it barely counted. And there was a man standing at the window, tall, pale, perfectly still. He didn't turn when she entered, but his shoulders tensed in a way that said he knew she was there. Elena's first thought was hospital security, but he wasn't wearing a uniform. Her second thought was intruder, but her hand didn't reach for the panic button. She stood in the doorway and watched him, noting the expensive cut of his coat, the way his hands were pressed flat against the window frame as if he were holding himself back from something, the absolute stillness of his posture. He looked like someone who had been carved from stone and then taught to breathe. The fluorescent lights above them dimmed slightly, a brownout flicker that shouldn't have happened in a hospital with backup generators. The monitors around Gabriel's bed beeped once, twice, then settled into a rhythm that was somehow steadier than before. Elena stepped into the room and let the door close behind her. The man spoke without turning. His voice was low and careful, each word placed like a chess piece. "You've been singing the old songs, the ones from Provence, from before the borders were drawn." Elena's exhaustion evaporated. She moved to the side, angling so she could see his profile, and that's when she noticed the window behind him. The glass reflected the room, the bed, the monitors, her own tired face. It did not reflect him. "My grandmother was from a village near Toulouse," Elena said, her voice steady, because panic was a luxury she had trained herself out of years ago. "How do you know that?" The man turned finally, and she saw his face. Sharp features. Dark eyes that didn't catch the light the way human eyes did. Skin so pale it looked like he'd never seen the sun. His hands trembled slightly as he lowered them from the window frame, and when he looked at Gabriel, the tremor worsened. "Because those songs are a protection ritual," he said. "And you've been casting it over my son every night without knowing what you were doing." Elena's mind cycled through responses and discarded them. The logical questions, the angry ones, the ones designed to buy time while she figured out if she was in danger. She looked at Gabriel, at the small rise and fall of his chest, and then back at the man who claimed to be his father. The man who cast no reflection. The man whose presence made the lights dim and the monitors stabilize. "What's your name?" she asked. "Lucienne. Just Lucienne. And Gabriel is waking because of me. Because of the songs." Lucienne nodded once, a small, sharp motion. "The ritual is old, older than the languages we speak now. Your grandmother must have known someone, learned it from someone who remembered. It binds a protector's presence to a child even through barriers, even through glass and walls and laws that say I cannot enter without invitation." "You stood outside," Elena said, not quite a question. "Every night. In the parking lot. The black sedan." Lucien's jaw tightened. "Every night for 6 months. Watching. Waiting. Hoping." Elena felt the weight of that settle over her. The image of this man standing in a parking lot in rain and heat and cold, watching a window because he couldn't cross a threshold, and she didn't understand it, but she recognized the shape of it. Desperation. The kind that didn't make noise. "Why couldn't you come in?" she asked. "Why couldn't you just visit like any other father?" Lucien looked at her fully then, and the weight of his attention was a physical thing, heavy and old. "Because I am not any other father," he said. "And there are laws older than your country, older than your medicine, that say I cannot enter a space where my son sleeps unless I am invited by someone who belongs there. I waited for him to wake. I waited for someone to see him, truly see him, and choose to help. You were the only one who sang." The monitors beeped. The lights steadied. Elena's mind catalogued the impossibilities and set them aside, because impossible things happened in hospitals every night, bodies that should have died and didn't, patients who woke up speaking languages they'd never learned. The stubborn mystery of consciousness returning to flesh that everyone had written off. She looked at Lucien and saw the fear he was trying to hide, the way his hands shook when he glanced at Gabriel, and she made a decision. If you're his father, she said, then you should be here when he wakes up. Tell me how to help. Lucien stared at her. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the stone. Before she could say anything else, he moved. Not walked, just moved, a flicker of motion too fast for her eyes to track, and he was gone. The door hadn't opened, the window was still closed. He had simply stopped being there. Elena stood alone in the room with Gabriel and the beeping monitors and the smell of antiseptic. On the windowsill, where Lucien's hand had rested, was a small white card. She picked it up. No name. Just an address in the old warehouse district downtown, and a time written in precise black ink. Midnight tomorrow. Elena turned the card over. Blank. She looked at Gabriel. His fingers moved again, just slightly, curling toward his palm. She reached out and touched his hand, and his skin was warm. "Come back," she whispered, not sure if she was talking to Gabriel or to the man who had vanished like smoke. "Come back and I'll sing for you." She slipped the card into her pocket and left the room, walking past the nurse's station where the day shift was settling in, past the coffee machine and the elevators, out into the parking lot where the sun was finally rising and the black sedan was gone. Her car sat alone in the gray light. Elena got in, started the engine, and drove home with the card burning a hole in her pocket and Gabriel's small hand warm in her memory, and the knowledge that something had shifted, some threshold had been crossed, and midnight tomorrow was going to change everything. Elena stood outside the address at 11:58, her breath fogging in the October air, looking up at a building that didn't match what she'd expected. Not a warehouse. An old hotel, one of those Gilded Age relics with limestone facades and narrow windows, converted into private apartments for people who valued discretion over square footage. The street was empty. No cars, no pedestrians, just the distant hum of traffic from the main avenue and the yellow glow of streetlights pooling on wet pavement. She'd spent the day not sleeping, sitting at her kitchen table with the white card in front of her, drinking coffee and telling herself she wasn't going to go. Then she'd looked up the address online and found nothing. No business listing, no rental history, just a property record from 1923 and a grainy photo of the lobby. Then she'd thought about Gabriel's fingers moving, about Lucien's hands shaking, about the black sedan that had been a silent vigil for 6 months. At 11:30 she'd changed into jeans and a sweater, left a note for her sister saying she'd be out late, and driven downtown with the card on the passenger seat. Now she was here. The door was unlocked. She pushed it open and stepped into a lobby that smelled of old wood and lemon polish, a space too clean to be abandoned, but too quiet to be lived in. A single elevator at the far end, its brass doors reflecting her movement. She pressed the button. The elevator rose without sound, stopping at the 4th floor. The doors opened onto a hallway with one door at the end, already ajar. Soft light spilled through the gap. Elena walked forward, her footsteps muffled by carpet that felt expensive under her shoes, and pushed the door wider. The sitting room was smaller than she'd imagined, furnished with the kind of antiques that looked uncomfortable but probably cost more than her car. Dark wood panels on the walls, velvet curtains drawn over tall windows, a chess set on a side table, the pieces carved from something that might have been ivory or bone. One lamp burned on a desk in the corner, casting warm light that didn't quite reach the edges of the room. Lucien stood near the window, his back to her, wearing the same dark coat he'd had on in the hospital. He turned when she entered. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to a chair near the desk. "There's tea if you'd like it." Elena glanced at the tea service on a silver tray, the delicate cups and the pot that steamed gently. She sat, but didn't reach for the tea. Lucienne remained standing, his hands behind his back, and she noticed he didn't move toward the tray either. "You don't drink it," she said. Not a question. "No," Lucienne said. "But the gesture matters. Hospitality is older than hunger." Elena leaned back in the chair and looked at him. The light caught his face differently here than it had in the hospital, sharpening the angles, making him look less like a man and more like something carved to resemble one. "You said Gabriel is your son," she said. "Start there. Tell me how a vampire has a human child." Lucian moved to the desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a folder thick with papers. He set it in front of her. Inside were medical records, birth certificates, photographs. Elena flipped through them slowly, her nurse's eye cataloging the details. A woman's face, dark-haired and smiling, holding a newborn. Hospital bracelets, immunization records, a death certificate dated 7 years ago, cause of death listed as postpartum hemorrhage. "Her name was Claire," Lucien said quietly. "We met at a gallery opening. She was an art historian. She knew what I was within a month and didn't care. We had 2 years together before she got pregnant." Elena looked up. "Vampires can have children?" "Rarely," Lucien said. "It requires specific conditions, bloodline compatibility, and even then the odds are slim." Claire wanted to try. She knew the risks. She chose them. And she died because of it, Elena said. Lucien's jaw tightened. "She died because childbirth is dangerous even with modern medicine, and because I couldn't give her blood to heal her without turning the child into something else. She made me promise not to. So I watched her bleed and held Gabriel and kept my promise." Elena set the folder down. "Why is he in the hospital? Why was he poisoned?" Lucienne returned to the window, his reflection absent in the dark glass. "There are 7 vampire courts in North America," he said. "I govern the eastern seaboard. The Thornhill court controls the Midwest. We've been in territorial negotiation for 3 decades. Claire's bloodline traced back to the old mediators, humans who could broker truces between our kind, who carried a genetic marker that made them resistant to compulsion and persuasion. Gabriel inherited it. If Thornhill gains custody of him, they gain leverage over every treaty I've signed." Elena felt the pieces clicking into place. They poisoned him. Lucien nodded. 6 months ago, a Thornhill operative posing as a pediatric neurologist prescribed what looked like seizure medication. Silver-laced compounds, slow-acting, designed to induce coma without obvious toxicity. By the time I realized what had happened, Gabriel was unresponsive, and the covenant was already in effect. "Explain the covenant," Elena said. Lucien turned from the window. "The covenant of disclosure is the oldest law we have. It forbids vampires from revealing themselves to humans who enter our spaces unless those humans come by invitation or formal summons. It prevents us from hunting in our own territories, from using our homes as traps. When Gabriel was hospitalized, the ICU became a protected space. I couldn't enter without being invited by someone who belonged there, someone human who had authority in that space. If I'd broken the rule, Thornhill could have claimed I was violating Gabriel's human rights, that I was using compulsion or coercion. They could have seized him under contested custody, and I'd have no legal recourse." "So you watched from the parking lot," Elena said. "For 6 months. Every night," Lucien said, "waiting for him to wake, waiting for someone to see him as more than a patient number." Elena thought about that, about the weight of standing in a parking lot in rain and snow and summer heat, watching a window and hoping. "Why didn't you hire someone to sing?" she asked. "Why didn't you tell someone what to do?" "Because I didn't know it would work," Lucien said. "The protection songs are rare, almost forgotten. I recognized the melody when I heard it through the window, but I didn't know if you were singing it intentionally or by accident. If I'd interfered, if I'd tried to instruct you, it might have broken the ritual. So I waited. And it worked." Elena picked up the teacup, felt the warmth against her palms, set it down without drinking. "You want me to testify at a council hearing?" she said. "To say that Gabriel responded to me, that a bond was formed, that you didn't compel or coerce it?" "Yes," Lucien said, "in 3 nights. If you refuse, Thornhill will claim Gabriel as a ward of their house under the argument that he has no responsive human connections, that his father is an unfit guardian, and that his mother's bloodline makes him a strategic asset requiring neutral custody. They'll erase his human heritage and raise him as a political tool. And if I testify, Elena said, I become a target. Lucienne met her eyes. Yes. Elena stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights blurred by the glass. She was thinking about Gabriel's small hand, about the way his fingers had moved, about the fact that she'd sung to him because it felt right, and now that choice had pulled her into something vast and old and dangerous. Prove it, she said without turning. Prove you're what you say you are. Behind her, she heard the drawer open again. When she turned, Lucienne was holding a silver letter opener, ornate and sharp. He placed it on the desk between them. Elena watched as he picked it up with his bare hand. The skin of his palm began to smoke immediately, a thin gray tendril rising into the air. The smell of burning flesh filled the room. Blisters formed, dark and wet, spreading across his fingers. Lucien held the letter opener for 3 seconds, his face completely still, then set it down. The burns were already healing, the blistered skin knitting together, new flesh growing over the damage. In 10 seconds his hand was unmarked. Elena had seen burns before, had treated them, knew how long they took to heal. She looked at Lucien's restored palm and then at his face. If you're this powerful, she said, why do you need me? Because the council respects human testimony more than vampire claims, Lucienne said. You're a neutral witness. I'm a desperate father. They'll believe you because you have no reason to lie for me. I can't compel you to testify. I can only ask. Elena was about to respond when someone knocked at the door. 3 sharp raps, too loud, deliberate. Lucien's entire body tensed. The door opened before either of them could move, and a woman stepped inside. She was tall and elegantly dressed, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, her coat tailored and expensive. 2 men in dark suits followed her, positioning themselves on either side of the doorway. The woman smiled at Elena, ignoring Lucienne completely. Miss Marsh, she said, I'm Isabelle Thornhill. I apologize for the intrusion, but I wanted to speak with you before you made any hasty decisions. Lucien moved forward half a step, then stopped. His restraint was visible, a wire pulled taut, his hands clenched at his sides. Isabelle walked to the desk and picked up the teacup Elena had touched, turning it in her hands as if examining the porcelain. You've already done so much for the child, Isabelle said, her voice pleasant and warm. Long hours, difficult work, all that emotional labor. Surely you don't want to do more. Nurses heal. They don't start wars. Elena stood very still, her mind racing. Isabelle set the teacup down and reached into her coat, pulling out a folded envelope. Inside is a settlement offer, Isabelle said. $50,000 in exchange for a simple statement. You'll say that Gabriel showed no responsive behavior, that no bond was formed, that you have no stake in his custody. You'll sign it, go home, and forget you were ever involved. Elena took the envelope, not opening it. Isabelle smiled wider. Think about it, she said. You have family, a sister, a niece. It would be unfortunate if they were drawn into this. She turned and walked to the door, the 2 men following. Before she left, she glanced back at Lucienne. Your son belongs to his mother's people, she said. You were just the vector. Then she was gone. The door closed. The room felt colder. Lucien stood by the window, his hands shaking again, and Elena realized he hadn't said a single word while Isabelle was there. She looked down at the envelope in her hand, then slipped it into her coat pocket. I need to go home, she said. Lucienne nodded. The hearing is in 3 nights, 10 o'clock. I'll send a car. Elena walked to the door, then paused. Why does a vampire court care about custody law? She asked. Because we are bound by law more than humans ever were, Lucienne said. Break it, and we lose everything. Thornhill wants Gabriel because his mother's bloodline traced back to the old mediators, humans who could negotiate truces. If they control him, they control the next century of treaties. Elena absorbed that, the weight of it, then left. The elevator descended in silence. She walked to her car, drove home through empty streets, and when she got to her apartment, she hung up her coat and found the envelope Isabelle had mentioned. But it wasn't the settlement offer. It was a second envelope, smaller, tucked into her pocket. Inside were photographs. Her apartment building, her sister's house, her niece's school, different angles, different times of day. No note, just the images. Elena sat at her kitchen table and spread the photos out, her hands steady, her mind clear. She thought about Gabriel's hand moving, about Lucienne's palm healing, about Isabelle's smile. She thought about the fact that she'd already chosen the moment she'd walked into that sitting room, and everything since had just been confirmation. 3 nights. Elena gathered the photos, put them back in the envelope, and set it next to the white card with the address. Then she poured herself a glass of water, drank it standing at the sink, and started making plans. Elena walked into St. Catherine's at 6:45 in the evening, her shift starting earlier than usual because 2 nurses had called in sick and the ICU was short-staffed. She'd spent the day trying to sleep and failing, lying in bed with her eyes closed and her mind running through scenarios, through Isabelle's smile and Lucien's burned palm and the photographs of her niece's school. She'd finally gotten up at 3, made coffee she didn't drink, and sat at her kitchen table staring at nothing until it was time to leave. Now she pushed through the double doors and nodded to the charge nurse, grabbed her assignment sheet, and scanned the room numbers. Gabriel was still listed, room 414, still in ICU. She'd expected that, but something in her chest loosened anyway, confirmation that he was still there, still breathing, still hers to monitor. She dropped her bag in her locker, changed into fresh scrubs, and went through the motions of checking in with the outgoing shift, getting report on her patients, the usual litany of vitals and medications and notes. When she finally made it to Gabriel's room, it was 7:30, and the sun was setting through the window, casting long orange light across the bed. Gabriel was awake. Not just eyes open awake, but actually awake, his head turned toward the window, his small hands resting on top of the blanket instead of curled beneath it. Elena stopped in the doorway, her breath caught. She'd seen patients wake from comas before, had watched the slow surfacing, the confusion, the vacant stares that took days to sharpen into awareness. This was different. Gabriel was present. His eyes tracked to her when she moved, and he blinked slowly, deliberately. She walked to his bedside and checked the monitors by habit, noting his heart rate and oxygen levels. Everything stable, everything normal. Then she looked at him and found him looking back. "Hi, sweetheart," she said softly. "Do you know where you are?" Gabriel's lips moved, but no sound came out. His throat would be dry, his voice unused for months. Elena reached for the water cup with the straw, held it to his lips, and let him take a small sip. He swallowed carefully and tried again. "Hospital," he whispered. His voice was thin and rough, barely audible. "That's right," Elena said. "You've been sick for a while, but you're getting better." Gabriel's eyes moved past her to the window, then back to her face. "You sang," he said, "every night. You sang the songs." Elena felt something tighten in her chest. "Yes," she said, "I did. Did you like them?" Gabriel nodded, a tiny movement. Then his eyes welled up, tears spilling over, and his chin trembled. "Papa," he said. "Where's Papa?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Elena pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed, taking Gabriel's hand gently. She could feel how fragile he was, how small, 7 years old and barely there. "Your papa has been here," she said. "He's been watching over you the whole time." He couldn't come inside, but he was always close. Gabriel's tears kept falling. "He promised he wouldn't leave," he said. He promised. He didn't leave, Elena said firmly. He kept his promise, and he's going to come see you very soon. I'm going to make sure of it. She stayed with Gabriel for another 10 minutes, talking quietly, letting him cry, adjusting his pillows and checking his IV site. When she stepped out into the hallway, her hands were shaking. She walked past the nurse's station to the staff bathroom, locked herself in, and pulled out her phone. The number on Lucienne's card didn't have a name attached. She dialed it anyway. It rang once. Lucienne's voice came through immediately, controlled and alert. "Elena, Gabriel is awake," she said. "He's asking for you. You need to come now." There was a pause, a silence so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. "I can't enter without invitation," Lucienne said finally. "You know that." "Then I'm inviting you," Elena said. "Right now. I'm a staff member. I have authority in this space. Come to the ICU, room 414. I'll meet you there." Another pause. "If I come, if I'm seen, it changes everything." "I know," Elena said. "Come anyway." She hung up before he could respond and left the bathroom. Her hands were steadier now, her mind clear. She went back to Gabriel's room and sat with him, holding his hand, telling him stories about nothing, about the hospital, about the city outside, about anything that would keep him calm. 20 minutes later, she heard footsteps in the hallway, the distinct sound of someone moving with purpose. She stood and went to the door. Lucien was walking toward her, his coat buttoned, his face a mask of control. Behind him, farther down the hall, a security guard stood near the elevators, his posture casual, but his attention focused. Elena noticed him the way she noticed everything, filed it away, and turned back to Lucienne. He stopped just outside the door. His eyes went past her to Gabriel, and she saw the crack in his composure, the way his breath caught. "Come in," Elena said clearly. "You're invited. Cross the threshold." Lucien looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. Then he stepped forward. The moment he crossed into the room, the overhead lights surged, a brief flare of too bright white that made Elena blink. Then they stabilized, settling back to normal. The monitors around Gabriel's bed beeped once in unison, a strange synchronization, then returned to their individual rhythms. Gabriel's eyes went wide. "Papa," he breathed. Lucienne was across the room in a movement too fast to follow, kneeling beside the bed, his hands reaching for Gabriel's small ones. He held them carefully, as if afraid they might break, and Gabriel started crying again, harder this time, but with relief instead of fear. "You stayed," Gabriel said between sobs. "You didn't leave." "I was always here," Lucienne said, his voice cracking on the words. "Every night. I watched your window. I never left." Gabriel tried to sit up, and Lucienne helped him, supporting his back, and then Gabriel was leaning into his father's chest, crying into his coat. Lucienne's arms wrapped around him, careful and protective, and his eyes closed. For 30 seconds, the careful control he'd worn like armor shattered completely. Elena saw his shoulders shake, saw him press his face against Gabriel's hair, saw the raw grief and relief that he'd been holding back for 6 months. She looked away, giving them privacy, and that's when she noticed the security guard. He was standing in the hallway now, closer than before, his phone held at an angle that pointed toward the room, toward the window, toward where Lucienne knelt with Gabriel, the glass behind them reflecting the bed, the monitors, Elena's own figure in the doorway, reflecting everything except Lucienne. Elena's stomach dropped. She moved toward the guard, but he was already walking away, phone pocketed, disappearing around the corner toward the elevators. She stood in the doorway, her mind racing, and knew with absolute certainty that she'd just made a terrible mistake. Behind her, Lucienne was murmuring to Gabriel in a language she didn't recognize, low and soft. Gabriel was calmer now, his breathing evening out, his small hands clutching his father's coat. Elena turned back to them. "We need to talk," she said quietly. Lucienne looked up. He'd rebuilt his composure, but she could see the edges of it, the cracks still showing. He glanced past her to the empty hallway, and understanding crossed his face. He kissed Gabriel's forehead and stood slowly. "I'll be right back," he told his son. "I'm not going far." Gabriel nodded, exhausted but peaceful, and lay back against the pillows. Lucienne followed Elena into the hallway. They walked to an empty consultation room at the end of the hall, and she closed the door. "What did I just do?" Elena asked. Lucien stood with his back to the wall, his hands behind him. And she realized he was holding himself in place again, forcing stillness. "You gave me my son back," he said. "And you gave Thornhill the proof they needed to force a ruling." "The security guard," Elena said. "He was filming." Lucian nodded. "He caught my reflection. Or the absence of it. That's evidence of covenant breach. I entered a protected space and my nature was revealed to surveillance. The council will have to respond." "How fast?" Elena asked. Lucian pulled out his phone, checked it, and his jaw tightened. "There's already a message. Emergency session called for tomorrow night. 8 o'clock. "The hearing was supposed to be in 3 nights, Elena said. "It was," Lucian said. "You've accelerated everything." Elena leaned against the door, trying to process the scope of what she'd done. She'd acted on instinct, on the need to reunite a father and son, and in doing so, she'd triggered exactly what Isabelle wanted. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be," Lucian said. "You did what was right. The cost doesn't change that." "What happens now?" Elena asked. "Now I prepare," Lucian said, "and you decide if you're willing to testify tomorrow instead of 3 days from now. If you are, I'll send a car at 7. If you're not, I'll understand." He moved to the door and Elena stepped aside. Lucian paused, his hand on the handle. "Thank you," he said, "for singing to him, for bringing me to him, for seeing him as more than a patient." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Lucian left. She stood in the empty consultation room for a long moment, then went back to Gabriel's room. He was asleep, his face peaceful, his breathing steady. The monitors beeped their rhythm. Through the window, the city lights were beginning to glow against the darkening sky. Elena pulled up a chair and sat beside his bed, watching him sleep, and thought about tomorrow night. About the council. About Isabelle's smile and the photographs of her niece's school. About Lucien's hands shaking as he held his son. She'd already decided. She'd decided the moment Gabriel asked for his father, maybe even before that, back in the sitting room when Lucien had burned himself to prove he was telling the truth. Tomorrow night she'd testify. Tomorrow night she'd walk into whatever waited for her in that council chamber. But tonight she sat with Gabriel and hummed one of the old songs, soft and low, and let him sleep under her protection one more time. Elena was told not to return to St. Catherine's until further notice. The call came at 11 in the morning, 2 hours after her shift should have started, delivered by the nursing director in a voice that was professionally neutral and personally apologetic. Administrative leave pending an inquiry into patient care protocols in the ICU. The director wouldn't say who filed the complaint, wouldn't specify what protocols had allegedly been violated, wouldn't give a timeline for resolution. Elena sat on her couch with the phone still in her hand for 20 minutes after the call ended, staring at the wall, her mind cycling through implications. She'd worked at St. Catherine's for 8 years. She'd never had a complaint, never had a disciplinary action, never been anything but competent and careful. This wasn't about her nursing. This was about Gabriel. This was about Lucienne. This was Thornhill reaching into her life and pulling threads until something unraveled. She called Lucien's number. He answered on the first ring and she told him what happened. There was a pause, then his voice came through steady and controlled. "Meet me at Patterson Park in an hour. The south entrance near the fountain. It's neutral ground." Elena hung up, changed into jeans and a jacket, and left her apartment. The black sedan was parked across the street again. Same spot as yesterday, windows tinted. She walked past it without looking and drove to the park, arriving 10 minutes early. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that promised rain but hadn't committed yet. The park was half empty, a few joggers on the paths, a woman throwing a tennis ball for a retriever, normal people doing normal things. Elena found the fountain, a concrete structure that wasn't running this late in the season, and sat on the edge. Lucienne appeared at exactly noon, walking from the tree line, his coat buttoned against the wind. He sat beside her, not too close, his posture formal even on a park bench. "I'm sorry," he said, "for your job, for the pressure they're putting on you." Elena shook her head. "Tell me about the hearing. What happens tomorrow night?" Lucian looked out at the park, his eyes tracking movement with the kind of awareness that didn't look human once you knew to watch for it. 3 judges from neutral houses, he said. None with territorial interest in the eastern seaboard or the Midwest. They'll hear testimony from both sides under oath of candor. It's a binding magic, older than the covenant. If a vampire lies under it, the pain is immediate and obvious. If a human lies under it, unconsciousness follows within seconds. The council respects it because it can't be faked. "What will Thornhill argue?" Elena asked. "That I violated the covenant by using you to circumvent the invitation rule," Lucian said. "That your songs were my idea, that I coached you or compelled you, that you're my agent rather than a neutral party, that Gabriel's waking was orchestrated, not organic. They'll try to prove I manipulated you from the beginning. And I need to testify that I acted independently," Elena said, "that I sang because I wanted to, that I invited you because Gabriel asked, that none of it was coercion." "Yes," Lucian said, "but there's a problem." He pulled a folded document from his coat, old paper protected in a plastic sleeve. Elena took it and recognized her grandmother's handwriting immediately. The careful European script, the French mixed with Occitan phrases. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice tight. "Thornhill's lawyers delivered it to my residence this morning," Lucienne said. "They've found your grandmother's journals. Multiple volumes, apparently, currently in the possession of a distant cousin in Toulouse. These pages are photocopies, but they're enough." Elena read the visible text, her eyes catching on words she half remembered. Protection songs, bloodline mediators, the old agreements between the living and the dead. She looked up at Lucian. "I found these journals when I was 14, she said, "after my grandmother died. I couldn't read most of it. The language was too archaic, the references too obscure. I thought they were just family stories, folklore. I didn't understand them." "Do you believe that?" Lucian said. "I do," Elena said. "But will the council?" Lucien's jaw tightened. "Thornhill will argue that you knew exactly what you were doing, that you came to St. Catherine's specifically because Gabriel was there, that you sang the songs intentionally, that the entire 6 months was a long manipulation designed to give me access. They'll paint you as my accomplice." "Can they prove that?" Elena asked. "They don't have to prove it," Lucienne said. "They just have to create reasonable doubt about your independence. If the judges believe you might have been acting on my behalf, even unconsciously, your testimony becomes inadmissible and the ruling defaults to contested custody. Thornhill wins." Elena folded the document and handed it back. "So what do we do?" Lucian reached into his other pocket and pulled out a silver chain with a small vial pendant. The glass no bigger than her thumbnail, filled with gray powder. "Rowan ash," he said. "Traditional counter to compulsion magic. If Isabelle tries to influence you during testimony, the ash will burn and break the effect. It won't prove she used magic, but it will disrupt her control long enough for you to speak freely. Wear it under your shirt tomorrow." Elena took the chain, feeling the weight of it, the cool metal against her palm. "This won't protect me from the council," she said. "It won't protect me from Thornhill." Lucien met her eyes. "No," he said. "It won't. It's just a promise that you're not alone in that room. Elena put the chain around her neck and tucked the vial under her shirt. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the woman with the retriever throw the ball again and again. What happens if the council rules against you? Elena asked. I'll be exiled, Lucienne said. Stripped of my territorial authority, Gabriel will be taken into Thornhill custody, and I won't have legal standing to challenge it. And you, Elena said, what happens to you? Lucien looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. I'll survive, he said. I've survived worse. That's not an answer, Elena said. It's the only one I have, Lucien said. He stood, buttoned his coat. The car will come for you at 7 tomorrow. The hearing is at 8. Dress formally if you can. The council respects ceremony. He walked away, back toward the tree line, and Elena sat on the fountain edge until the cold seeped through her jeans and she couldn't feel her fingers. Then she went home. The black sedan followed her. When she got to her apartment, there was a black envelope on her doorstep, sealed with red wax. Inside was a formal summons, handwritten in calligraphy, instructing her to appear before the Territorial Council at 8 o'clock the following evening. The address was downtown, a building she didn't recognize. Elena set the summons on her kitchen table next to the photographs Isabelle had left, next to her grandmother's journals that she'd pulled from storage the night before. She made coffee and sat staring at all of it, trying to see the pattern, trying to understand how her life had narrowed to this single point. Her phone rang at 4 in the afternoon, her sister's number. Elena answered and heard her sister's voice, tight with controlled panic. Someone sent flowers to Emma's school, her sister said, white lilies. The card said children should be protected from their parents' mistakes. Elena, what the hell is going on? Elena closed her eyes. Listen to me carefully, she said. Take Emma and go to a hotel. Don't use your credit card. Use cash. Don't tell me where you're going. Just go tonight and stay there until I call you. Her sister was silent for 3 seconds. Then, you're scaring me. I know, Elena said. I'm sorry. Please just do this. Trust me. After another pause, her sister said, You're going to explain this. Yes, Elena said, knowing she couldn't, knowing the gap between what she knew and what she could say was widening into a chasm. I promise. She hung up before her sister could ask more questions. She sat at the table until the light outside faded, until the apartment was dark except for the glow from the streetlights through the blinds. She pulled the blinds closed, checked the locks on the door and windows, saw the black sedan still parked across the street. At 9 o'clock, someone knocked. Elena looked through the peephole and saw a man she didn't recognize, older, gray-haired, wearing an expensive suit. She opened the door with the chain still latched. Yes, she said. My name is Marcus, the man said. I'm an advisor to Lucienne. May I come in for a moment? I won't take much of your time. Elena hesitated, then unlatched the chain. Marcus stepped inside, glanced around her small apartment with the assessing eye of someone used to evaluating spaces, and waited until she closed the door. I won't waste courtesy on small talk, Marcus said. You're in a situation you didn't choose, and you're handling it with more grace than most would. But I want to offer you information Lucienne won't. Elena crossed her arms. What information? If the council rules against Lucienne tomorrow, Gabriel will be taken and Lucienne will be exiled, Marcus said. But if you recant your testimony and claim Lucienne coerced you, the council will consider you a victim rather than a participant. They'll spare you and they'll spare Gabriel. Thornhill will take custody, yes, but Gabriel will be alive and protected, and you'll be free to return to your life. At what cost? Elena asked. Lucien's throne, Marcus said. His authority, his standing. He'll be declared unfit and removed from power. But he'll survive. We always survive. Why are you telling me this? Elena asked. Does Lucienne know you're here? No, Marcus said, and he'd be furious if he did. But you're a human caught in a fight that started before you were born. You don't owe him this. You don't owe Gabriel this. I'm giving you an out." Elena looked at Marcus, at the pragmatic kindness in his face, at the genuine offer of escape. She thought about her sister and her niece in a hotel somewhere under a fake name. She thought about her job, her apartment, the life she'd built through 8 years of night shifts and careful competence. She thought about Gabriel's hand moving, about Lucien kneeling beside the bed with his composure shattered. "I'm a nurse caught in a fight that started when I saw a child alone," Elena said. "That's not the same thing." Marcus studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, a small movement of respect. "I thought you'd say that," he said. "But I had to ask." He moved to the door, then paused. "The oath of candor will hurt if you're uncertain about anything," he said. "Be sure of what you know. Be sure of what you felt. That's the only armor you'll have." Elena opened the door for him. Marcus left without another word. She locked the door behind him, checked the chain twice, and went to her bedroom. She pulled out the one formal dress she owned, black and simple, appropriate for funerals and apparently for council hearings. She hung it on the closet door. Then she lay down on her bed fully clothed, the rowan ash vial cool against her sternum, and stared at the ceiling. She didn't sleep. At 7 the next evening, a car arrived. Elena was ready. The car that picked Elena up at 7 was a black town car with tinted windows and a driver who didn't speak, just opened the door and waited while she climbed into the back seat. The interior smelled of leather and something faintly medicinal, antiseptic maybe, or the residue of whatever vampires use to mask their presence. Elena sat with her hands folded in her lap, the rowan ash vial hidden under her dress, cool against her skin. The city slid past the windows, streetlights blurring into streams of white and gold, and she watched without seeing, her mind already in the hearing room, rehearsing answers, testing the weight of truth. The car stopped in front of an old opera house she'd passed 100 times but never entered, one of those Gilded Age monuments with a limestone facade and narrow windows that looked more like a bank than a theater. The driver opened her door and gestured toward a side entrance, a plain door with no signage, just a brass handle worn smooth by decades of hands. Elena stepped out into the cold evening air and walked to the door. It opened before she could knock. A woman in a dark suit, no expression, gestured her inside and down a staircase that spiraled into darkness. The walls were close, and the air grew colder with each step, the kind of cold that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with the earth pressing in from all sides. At the bottom, a hallway stretched forward, lit by sconces that flickered like candles but burned too steadily to be flame. The woman led her to a set of double doors at the end, pushed them open, and stepped aside. The hearing room was smaller than Elena had imagined, maybe 30 feet across, with a vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. 3 judges sat at a raised table that forced everyone to look up, their faces illuminated by overhead chandeliers that cast dim gold light and left the corners of the room in darkness. The space smelled of dust and old wood, and something underneath that, something mineral and cold. Lucienne stood to the left, alone, his hands behind his back, his posture so rigidly controlled he looked carved from stone. Isabelle Thornhill stood to the right with 2 men flanking her, both tall and expressionless, their eyes tracking Elena's entrance with predator focus. There were chairs arranged in rows behind a low barrier, maybe a dozen people scattered among them, vampires all, watching with the kind of stillness that meant they weren't breathing. Elena walked to the center of the room where a single chair faced the judge's table. She sat, feeling the weight of attention like pressure against her skin. The judge in the middle was a man, middle-aged in appearance, his face neutral and clinical. The judge on the left was an older woman with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes sharp and assessing. The judge on the right was younger, maybe 30 in appearance, his expression leaning toward boredom. The middle judge spoke first, his voice carrying easily in the acoustics of the room. This is a territorial custody hearing under the Covenant of Disclosure and the Charter of Bloodline Rights. The matter before us concerns Gabriel Beaumont, age 7, vampire born of human mother, Claire Beaumont, deceased, and vampire father Lucien Beaumont, present. Thornhill Court has filed a contested custody claim based on alleged covenant violation and prior custodial agreement. We will hear testimony under oath of candor. All parties are bound by this proceeding. He gestured to Isabelle. Thornhill Court will present first. Isabelle stepped forward, her posture elegant and controlled, her voice measured and clear. Thank you, Your Honors. The facts of this case are straightforward. Lucien Beaumont violated the covenant of disclosure by using a human agent to circumvent invitation requirements, thereby gaining access to his son through manipulated means. The agent in question is Elena Marsh, a nurse at St. Catherine's Medical Center, who engaged in a 6-month campaign of protection rituals designed to bind Lucien's presence to his son across barriers he could not legally cross. We will demonstrate that Miss Marsh acted with full knowledge and intent, that her grandmother's documented history as a bloodline mediator proves she understood the nature of the songs she sang, and that Lucien coordinated this effort through proxy channels that left no direct communication trail but achieved the desired outcome. Isabelle gestured, and one of her men placed a tablet on the judge's table, its screen showing the security footage from the hospital. The judges leaned forward, watching Lucienne kneel beside Gabriel's bed, watching the window behind them reflect everything except his figure. This footage was captured the night Lucienne entered the ICU, Isabelle said. Note the absence of reflection. Note the temporal distortion in the overhead lights. Note the child's immediate recognition and response, indicating prior awareness of his father's nature. This was not a spontaneous reunion. This was the culmination of a planned operation. She continued for 20 minutes, presenting linguistic analysis of the Occitan songs, photocopies of Elena's grandmother's journals, testimony from the hospital administrator who claimed Elena had requested Gabriel's case specifically and had exhibited unusual attachment to a patient she had no prior relationship with. The administrator's voice came through a recording, nervous and rehearsed, clearly reading from a script. Elena sat and listened, feeling the web of implications tighten, each piece of evidence selected and arranged to create a narrative that wasn't quite false, but wasn't quite true either. When Isabelle finished, the middle judge nodded and turned to Lucienne. Mr. Beaumont, your response. Lucienne stepped forward, his voice steady and formal. Elena Marsh acted independently. Her choice to sing was instinctive, based on her training and compassion as a healthcare professional. No communication occurred between us until the night Gabriel began to wake. I have surveillance logs from the hospital parking lot, time-stamped entries showing my presence, but never my entry into the building, never contact with Miss Marsh or any hospital staff. The songs were protection rituals, yes, but Miss Marsh did not cast them with intent. She cast them with care for a child who was alone. That is not manipulation. That is mercy. He placed a folder on the judge's table. The logs inside showed months of data, vehicle timestamps, weather records, a meticulous accounting of his vigil. The neutral judge reviewed them without expression. The older woman, Celeste, watched Lucienne with something that might have been sympathy. The younger judge yawned. Isabelle smiled slightly, as if Lucienne had said exactly what she expected. We will now hear testimony from Miss Marsh under oath of candor, the middle judge said. Elena stood. The younger judge descended from the raised table carrying a silver circlet, delicate and cold, its inner surface engraved with symbols Elena didn't recognize. He placed it on her head, and the metal bit into her temples, tight and invasive, and suddenly the room sharpened. Colors became too vivid, sounds too distinct. She could hear the flutter of pages as the middle judge turned through documents, could smell the dust in the corners, and the faint copper scent that clung to Isabelle. Her own heartbeat was too loud. The circlet was cold and getting colder. You will answer truthfully, the middle judge said. Deviation from truth will be evident to all present. Do you understand? Yes, Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. Isabelle stepped forward. Did Lucien Beaumont provide you with the protection songs you sang to Gabriel? No, Elena said. The circlet stayed cold. Did you know Gabriel was vampire-born when you began singing to him? Elena hesitated. The circlet warmed slightly against her skin. A warning. I suspected something was wrong, she said carefully. His case was unusual. No family, anonymous payments, no visitors. I didn't know what he was, but I knew he wasn't a standard patient. The circlet cooled again, accepting the incomplete truth. Isabelle's eyes narrowed. Did you continue singing because you wanted to help Lucien Beaumont reclaim his son? Elena met Lucien's eyes across the room. His face was unreadable, his posture frozen, but she saw the tension in his shoulders, the barely contained fear. She looked back at Isabelle. I continued singing because Gabriel was alone, Elena said, and no child should wake up alone. The circlet went cold as ice, truth absolute. Isabelle's expression flickered, just for a second, frustration breaking through her composure. Then she smiled again. Your compassion is admirable, Miss Marsh, but we're not here to judge your heart. We're here to determine custody, and on that matter, the law is clear. She gestured, and one of her men brought forward a leather folder, opened it on the judge's table. Inside was a contract, old paper, handwritten signatures, dated and notarized. This is a custodial transfer agreement, signed by Claire Beaumont, 3 days before Gabriel's birth. In it, she cedes all parental rights to Thornhill Court in exchange for advanced medical care during a complicated pregnancy. Under vampire law, a parent's written consent overrides paternal rights if the father was not present at the signing and had no knowledge of the agreement. Lucien Beaumont was not present. He did not know. This contract is legally binding. The room went silent. Elena watched Lucien's face and saw something break behind his eyes, grief and shock and disbelief all at once. His hands unclenched slowly, as if he'd forgotten they were fists. That's not possible, he said, his voice barely audible. Claire would never. Celeste leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. Mr. Beaumont, do you contest the validity of this contract? Lucien stared at the document, then at Isabelle. I've never seen this before. Claire never mentioned it. She wouldn't have signed this without telling me. Isabelle's smile widened. Perhaps she didn't trust you with the decision. Perhaps she knew you'd refuse the help she needed. Either way, the contract exists. The signature has been verified by 3 independent analysts. The notary's seal is authentic. Gabriel Beaumont is legally a ward of Thornhill Court. The middle judge began gathering papers, his expression suggesting the matter was settled. The younger judge looked relieved. Celeste stared at the contract, her face troubled. Elena stood, the circlet still cold on her temples, her mind racing. She looked at the contract from across the room, at the signature, at the date. Wait, she said. The judges paused. Isabelle turned, her expression carefully neutral. Miss Marsh, the middle judge said, you are not an attorney, and this is not a cross-examination. You've given your testimony. Please be seated. That signature is dated 3 days before Gabriel's mother was admitted to the hospital, Elena said, her voice cutting through the formality. But the hospital logs show she was already in critical condition at that time. Preeclampsia, kidney failure, on bed rest per doctor's orders. She couldn't have traveled. She couldn't have held a pen long enough to sign a legal document. Isabelle's composure cracked slightly. Miss Beaumont came to our estate privately for the signing. We have medical staff who can attest to her condition at the time. Then produce them, Elena said. Produce the travel records. Produce toll receipts, security footage, anything that proves she left the hospital, went to your estate, signed this contract, and then returned 30 miles away to die without a single person noticing. Celeste straightened in her chair, her eyes sharp. Miss Thornhill, these are reasonable questions. Isabelle looked at the older judge, then back at Elena. Claire Beaumont was a private person. She requested discretion. We honored that. So there are no records, Elena said. No witnesses. No proof she was ever at your estate. Just a conveniently notarized contract that appears 3 days before her death, giving you custody of the one child who could shift territorial power for the next century. Isabelle's face went cold and hard. You're a nurse, Miss Marsh. Surely you understand the importance of consent and documentation. I understand the importance of forged documents when I see them, Elena said. That signature was made by someone who couldn't hold a pen. The middle judge looked at Isabelle, then at the contract. Miss Thornhill, can you provide corroborating evidence of the signing event? Isabelle was silent for 3 seconds, her jaw tight. Then she said, We will need time to gather additional records. Celeste leaned back in her chair, her voice carrying weight. You claim the mother traveled to your estate while in critical condition, signed a contract, and then returned to a hospital 30 miles away to die, all without leaving a single record, toll receipt, or witness. I find that implausible. The middle judge set the contract aside. We will recess to investigate the authenticity and circumstances of this document. Until our inquiry is complete, temporary custody of Gabriel Beaumont is granted to Lucien Beaumont under supervised conditions. This hearing is adjourned. He struck a small gavel against the table, and the sound echoed in the vaulted space. Isabelle turned and walked out without looking at Elena, her men following. The other vampires in the audience dispersed silently, flowing toward the doors like shadows. Celeste descended from the raised table and approached Elena. The younger judge removed the circlet from her head, and the world snapped back to normal, colors dulling, sounds retreating. Elena swayed slightly, and Celeste caught her elbow. Steady, the older woman said quietly. The oath takes a toll. Thank you for your courage. She released Elena's arm and left. Lucienne stood alone in the center of the room, staring at the judge's table where the contract still lay. Elena walked to him. You saved him, Lucienne said quietly, not looking at her. Again. It's not over, Elena said. The investigation will take time. Isabelle has other moves. I know, Lucienne said, but for now, Gabriel is mine. That's enough. He finally turned to her, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion and something deeper, something that looked like gratitude and grief tangled together. Come with me, he said. I'll take you to see him. They left through a different door, climbing a different staircase into the cold night, and Elena followed him into whatever came next, knowing she'd crossed another threshold, knowing she was no longer a witness, but a player in a war that wouldn't end with one hearing, one contract, one moment of truth.